Good afternoon, everyone. Please continue eating your meals. I am going to encourage you to do that and keep some water nearby because I plan to step on some toes this afternoon. I'm going to say good afternoon to everyone. President Mims, members of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, any invited guests present, any honored guests present. I am deeply honored to be invited to speak to you today at your annual scholarship luncheon. When Mr. Mims asked me to speak, he said that he wanted me to talk about my journey to the bench, and he said it was a scholarship luncheon. And I was encouraged by the fact that he wanted me to talk about the journey, and more importantly, that it was a scholarship luncheon. So I'm going to step away from jokes and get right down to business. As you know, I am the Chief Judge of the 8th Judicial Circuit, which encompasses Baltimore City. And first off, on behalf of the members of my bench, those of you that are visiting, I welcome you to Baltimore City. In addition to being a judge, I happen to love history. And I would be remiss if I didn't give you a little bit of a history lesson. You see, living in Baltimore City, I am constantly reminded of important events from a historical context. So where are you? Well, you're on Pratt Street in Baltimore City. You're south of the Mason-Dixon line. And 200 years ago, up the street where ships were built, and you can get some very good Chesapeake Bay crabs. By the way, get some before you leave town. I highly recommend it. Did you know that there were pens near the docks? And in those pens were shackled slaves that were routinely marched down Pratt Street to awaiting ships that took off from the Baltimore Harbor to points south, plantations in the Carolinas, and in New Orleans and other places. Yeah, right down the street from where we're seated. And 3 or 4 blocks away, I work at the Clarence Mitchell Jr. Courthouse. An attorney by the name of Thurgood Marshall argued cases in that courthouse in the 50s so that one day I could go to the University of Maryland School of Law. When he could not, they refused to admit him. So when you ask me to talk to you about my journey to the bench, I would be remiss if I didn't give you a history lesson, because my journey to the bench started many, many years before I was ever born, before I was ever thought of, before my parents were born. You know, I didn't start out wanting to be a judge. I'm the daughter of a retired nurse and an educator. And that educator, he believed and said frequently, any child can learn. So I grew up in a house with a black and white television, and I was what you can call a Perry Mason kid. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about, and those of you that are pretending you don't know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. It was a black and white television, you know, and an attorney, and he carried around this big, fat law book tucked under his arm. It was called the Corpus Juris Secundum. And you know, Perry had a way of getting the bad guys to tell the truth, no matter what. Truth, justice, and the American way. That's that other television show I watched, Superman. Y'all remember that too. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about the latest Superman. I'm talking about the black and white Superman. I was a locomotive on a railroad track. That's what my dad used to say. Because at a very young age, somewhere around 8 or 9, I told him, I want to be a lawyer, just like Perry Mason. I began my legal career in 1979 at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. You heard about that. For those of you that are basketball fans, you know, that's that team, that 16th seed team that recently in March whooped the #1 seeded UVA. I'm just saying, whooped soundly. It wasn't by a few points, but clearly defeated. Now, you know I'm going into this and taking great pleasure because during the game, what it represented for me was the proverbial David and Goliath. You know, David being underestimated by the mighty opponent. It's the theme very familiar to me because it smacks of the way I may have persevered in my career. I'm an African-American woman, clearly, seeking to join a profession of white males, telling my father at 8 or 9 in the 60s that that's what I wanted to be, and I didn't know a lawyer other than Perry. I didn't see a lawyer in my community. You know, there were undertakers and teachers and people who worked like yourselves for transportation agencies. There were people who rode the rails and others who provided for their families, but I didn't know a lawyer. Now I digress a little bit because you really want to know, how did I become the chief? When almost 40 years ago, when I entered law school, 20, maybe 25% of the law school class at the University of Maryland were women. That's it. Perhaps a little more than 24 African-American students were even in the first-year class, along with me. And at that time, the University of Maryland was still under a federal mandate to desegregate at every level: administrative, teaching staff, the law school, the dental school, the nursing school, the medical school. And in 1981, when they decided to name the law library after Thurgood Marshall, at that time a justice of the Supreme Court, he refused to attend. Why? Because he said they were still as racist in 1981 as they were when they refused to admit him into the school. And where was I in 1981? At the University of Maryland School of Law. Yet, I had a dream. Ladies and gentlemen, in this room, there are students sitting near you, and they have dreams. And my dream was to be something that I couldn't see because I couldn't see anyone who looked like me, either by my face or my gender. I grew up with the only lawyers that might have come into view were white men on television or that my father knew. And back then, big firms had all white males and very few women even. In Baltimore, there were no female partners in the law firms. Only after graduate school did I hear about a few black male lawyers that were even hired. What existed were some well-known black firms. For those of you who are local, you'll know the names of Russell and Thompson, the legal giants in the profession. Some names like Watts, Murphy, Dorsey, Howard, and the Honorable Judge Bell. Those were lawyers, all males. So mostly, still I saw no one who looked like me. And as I traveled through law school, I wasn't hearing what I was to do upon graduation. If I couldn't get into the law firms because they weren't hiring me, it was the public sector. I was expected, because in the interviews they couldn't ask me whether I wanted to get married and have children, I was expected not to do anything strenuous. You know, ladies, our delicate sensibilities, we're not really capable of embracing or handling the difficult tasks. We can't multitask. We can't have children, raise a family, and work at the same time. It's not really possible. And some of you are looking at me, what is she talking about? Others in this room know exactly what I mean. It's called the 3 strikes. You're black, you're female, and expected to have challenges to work life and career life. And if you are aggressive and career-oriented and successful, then you're one of those mean, black, hateful women. I said I was going to step on some toes. And I am the chief. And I supervise 35 other judges. So let me continue with my message. Because I did not believe that I had to give up having a family and a career, though I was not expected to even try to have both. I certainly didn't feel that I had any sensitivities that I could not handle murder trials or complex malpractice cases. And so therefore, I went after my dreams. And I could not, and I would not be discouraged. So you're saying, okay, so how did you do that? That's why you're here. You're supposed to explain to these young people present how to do that. I'll tell you a story. Because as I searched my mind, this was the place, this was the time that I believed that that particular part of my character was forged. It's a simple story. It's not complex. I was in the street with my father, and the boys in the neighborhood were running around the block. They were racing, as boys do. They would stand up to the line, and Dad would say, go, and they would run around the block, and then someone would win and come in second. My dad knew that I liked to run, but he noticed that I wasn't participating in the race. And he said to me, why don't you race? And I responded, only the boys are running, and girls can't run against boys. And he said very soundly, then you've already lost. I stepped up to the line, and I ran around the block. And no, I didn't win, but I didn't come in last. And it was at that moment that I no longer was worried about being the one and only in the room or the race. Because at that moment, I realized that my career was headed in a direction that I would often be the one and only. And if I spent my time worried about if I was the only one, I wouldn't focus on the task in front of me. I'll give you an analogy. If I tell you you don't have anything on the back of your shirt or your jacket, there's nothing there. No, you don't have anything on the back of your jacket. The first thing you're going to do when you get to the ladies' room or the men's room is you're going to look. Because what you're running around in your head is what I told you wasn't there. I've laid a seed that is grown in your mind and is taking you away from the focus and the issue in front of you. I accept it. I'm going to be the one and only in the room. So, let's get on with business. So I became one of the few female assistant state's attorneys in 1983 under Kurt Schmoe. And by the way, that was my dream job. At the time I grew up, came out of law school, that was the only thing I wanted to be. I couldn't imagine being anything else but an assistant state's attorney. I thought that was going to be the best job in the world. I had made it. I could practice law, and I was working for a dynamic boss, Kurt Schmoe, who later became the president of the University of Baltimore after being mayor of Baltimore City. I became a division chief. And by the way, those sensitivities, I was the special victims division chief. We did all the rapes and child sexual abuse cases in Baltimore City. Think about it, in Baltimore City. We had a dynamic group of people, and I was honored to champion the victims that are victims of sexual predators. In the 80s, I went into private practice for a short time. One and only, I joined an old, well-known, all-male Jewish law firm. We represented Mano, Schwartz, Furriers, and Giant Food, and a number of area doctors, among other clients. They'd never had a woman, they'd never had an African-American attorney, and it was interesting when I showed up in faraway places to represent Mano, Schwartz, or Giant Foods, because they would say, well, I see the lawyer for Giant Foods isn't here. Private practice was lucrative, but I enjoyed criminal litigation more, so I left. I became one of the first female prosecutors at the Federal Public Defender's Office in Maryland, who was a person of color. And then later, the only one female assistant U.S. attorney in St. Croix, the Virgin Islands. How did I get there? I did such a good job as a division chief that the U.S. attorney in the Virgin Islands asked me to come there. They didn't have a child abuse law. They didn't have anything to protect their children, and she asked, would you consider coming to the U.S. attorney's office, helping us write a law, and handling the cases there? And I was honored to do that. When I got there, they gave me more than just child abuse. They gave me all of a criminal docket, and the U.S. attorney in Florida saw me taking out large cartels and drug cases and invited me to Middle Florida to be the criminal chief. I said Middle Florida, for those of you that don't know where I'm talking about, it's not Miami. Jacksonville on the north, Fort Myers on the south, Tampa, St. Petersburg. Middle Florida has something called the Okefenokee Swamp. It's real. And this New Yorker transplant was in the South, and clearly out of her element when she opened the Tampa Tribune and found it saying in an editorial that the National Organization of Women, now, was a communist organization. I felt out of place and out of water, but I still supervised 90 federal prosecutors, and none of them looked like me. And I said none of them looked like me. There were 5 women out of 130 in the entire office, and in my division, only 2 women, and I hired the 3rd woman, who was African American. One and only again. So my journey to the bench was one that went through one and onlys. But it was the support from my father, the teacher, the educator, my mother, the nurse, my aunts, my uncles, and other family members that weren't related to me, that said, whatever you do, just do your best. For no one can ask you to do more than your very best. Pursue education and dream. And I say dream and I pause. I'm not Martin Luther King, so I'm not saying I have a dream. I'm saying I had a dream and I could dream. Because it's the dream and hard work, the determination and the education that allows you to realize the dream. My dream was to be a lawyer. Remember, I said I wasn't thinking about being a judge. It was only later that my dream, having been realized, allowed me to take the next logical step, and that was to the bench. I stand before you blessed to have a career. My daughter says to me, Mom, you know, you don't fry chicken well. And why don't you do cupcakes? Because when you do a cake, the center kind of goes down and it's not really cooked properly. I can try a case. So as you are trying to be what you are, you have to keep in mind that there will be things that you will succeed in, and there will be things that you will struggle for. This little black girl, born in the 50s, raised in the 60s and 70s, dared to dream because people who loved me told me I could dream. They fought for the dream. They said I could be Perry Mason. It was my mother and father who sued the school system on my behalf so that I could go to an integrated school, even though it was New York. It was Thurgood Marshall and others like him who sued the systems and who went and acceded to the bench. It was people like the Honorable Mabel House Hubbard, the first black female judge in Maryland, who moved mountains and built bridges so that I could actually see and visualize her sitting on the bench. And I'm going to speak about her as I conclude, but I see I'm getting to the end of my time. I'm going to talk fast, but I need you to understand, you all are giving a lot of money to these young people, and that is wonderful. And I do not want to minimize that in any way. But what I'm going to talk about is you giving of your time. The rest of what I have to say has to do about leaving folks behind. As you step up and you get yours and you give them your money, do you give them your time? On my wall is a framed poster. It says, priorities. 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove, or even where I lived. But the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child. The true meaning of that should not be escaped because you ask me how I became the chief. Well, I was nurtured, I was mentored, I was counseled, I was encouraged to go after my dreams, I was encouraged to pursue my dream. And trust me, after 20 years, I have seen the opposite. The result of people coming into my courtroom neglected, disappointed, disillusioned. The color of hopelessness is dark. I have seen it in their eyes, and I know what it looks like when there are no dreams, when they've been destroyed. And as I conclude, most of you in this room may have seen a movie called Black Panther. Just follow me for a moment, because you're going to say it's a movie, it's a comic strip. Yes, I know that, but follow me for a moment. Most of the people in the movie theater were under 30. And as I was listening and watching, I started noticing. The movie took place at one point in Oakland, California. Oakland. Black Panther Party. Oakland, California, the Black Panther Party gave out food. They fed the young people. They had a free breakfast program. They handed out shoes and clothes to the poor. And I also remember they tried to instill confidence, pride, and respect for Blackness, family, culture. And as many of you know, that's how the movie starts. There's a group from Wakanda that goes to Oakland. And I started thinking about that. And what happens to the young man from Wakanda? He has a child who gets left behind. And what happens to the young man who's left behind? Not the prince who's taken back to Wakanda, who's nurtured with family and culture. But the one that is left behind becomes violent and vicious and angry and resentful. Think about what I'm saying to you. If you pack up and get that real good job and move out to the counties and leave those young people in Baltimore City, and you don't come back, you just sprinkle a little money here and there and feel real good about yourself, they come walking into my courtroom. I appreciate the money. They appreciate the money. But there's some very bright minds standing in my courtroom. They're not mentored. No dream, no gold, no one to believe in like you had when you were coming up. because you think about how you got to where you are. Those bright minds are ripe for the picking by the gangs and perpetrators, drugs, and even women are human trafficked in Baltimore. As you drive in to drop off your kids at the very nice private schools we have here in Baltimore City, and you jump back in your car and drive back out to the county, what about the kids that can't afford to go to those private schools, that are just as bright as your kids? We need your physical presence in their lives. We need you to mentor. We need them to see you just like they see the drug dealer on the corner. We need you to mentor them. Your kids are grown, then you got a lot of time. And I need you. Your kids are married and you've got grandkids, then you got experience. And I need you. Those young people come into my courtroom and I need to show them something other than just me. As long as I'm on the bench, I am going to try to help that young man to pick up a book to study rather than sell drugs on the corner, and help that young sister to get her GED rather than sell her body to make money to feed her child. I'm going to try to help the other folks that are strung out on drugs. I am going to try to get drug treatment for them, for I believe that the young people deserve a second chance. But the violent folks, the ones that were left behind, the ones that are only going to hurt people, they need to be taken out of our communities because we can't fix them now. You see, there's an old saying, you might have recognized it. Frederick Douglass said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." The kindness of extending yourself and offering assistance may open a door and expand belief, instill hope, and maybe give birth to a dream in the minds of young people in our community. I can only encourage you to help create more Judge Heards by giving of your time as well as your money. And if you do that, I won't continue to tell you what I see when I look in the eyes of some of the young people, because what I see is what it looks like when a dream dies. You know, it wastes up and away like a raisin in the sun. To get more Judge Heards, I need you. I need your influence. I need your strong role modeling. I need your wisdom and experience. I need you to give like I got. Those of you that say, you know, it's not my job, you're right, it's not. But you don't know who might be one of those young people. You don't know what scientist, what future president, what future leader you might mentor with words of integrity and respect and excellence and courage. Clearly, we all sometimes take for granted who we are to others. So I ask you not to forget that. And I want to conclude with just saying, Dalai Lama had a great quote. He said, "Just as ripples spread out when a single pebble is dropped in the water, the actions of individuals can have far-reaching effects." I got bit by the judge bug because I saw the Honorable Mabel House Hubbard. I saw dignity, professionalism, and a heart. I saw a jurist, a woman, and I saw what I could be. It's time for us to embrace our community and stop running from it. I ask you, please, give of your time to your community. That's how I got where I am. And my daughter told me not to do this last part, but I'm hard-headed and a little bit old school. and then I'll take my seat. To be young, gifted, and Black. Oh, what a lovely, precious dream. To be young, gifted, and Black. Open your heart to what I mean. In the whole world, you know, there are billions of boys and girls who are young, gifted, and Black. And that's a fact. Young, gifted, and Black, we must begin to tell our young that there's a world waiting for you. And this quest is just begun. So when you're feeling low, yeah, there's a great truth that you should know. When you're young, gifted, and Black, your soul's intact. Give that message to a young person that you mentor, and I'll know you received my message. Thank you.